On a bitter February morning in 1997, in a small New England town where neighbors still left their doors unlocked and children walked home from school alone, a young woman named Sarah Hartley left for work at the local diner and never arrived. Her car was found 3 hours later in the parking lot of an abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of town, engine cold, keys in the ignition, driver's side door hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Inside the vehicle, investigators found her purse, her jacket folded neatly on the passenger seat, and a single leather glove on the floorboard. The other glove was never found. Sarah was 23 years old, a newlywed of 8 months, and by all accounts, she had everything to live for. The question that would haunt the community for the next 27 years was simple and terrible. Where did Sarah Hartley go, and who made sure she would never come home? Millbrook, Massachusetts, population 4,200, sits nestled in the Berkshire foothills like a photograph from another era. In 1997, the town still had one stoplight, a main street lined with red brick buildings that housed a hardware store, a pharmacy with a soda fountain, and Murphy's Diner, where the coffee was always hot and the gossip flowed freely. The old textile mills that had once employed half the town had closed their doors in the 1970s, leaving behind hulking brick structures with broken windows that reflected the sky like empty eyes. Most families in Millbrook worked in the larger towns nearby, commuting 30 or 40 minutes to factory jobs or service positions, returning home each evening to a place where everyone knew your name and your business. Sarah Hartley, born Sarah Chen, had grown up in Boston but moved to Millbrook in the summer of 1995 after meeting Daniel Hartley at a mutual friend's wedding. Daniel was 31, 9 years her senior, a shift supervisor at a manufacturing plant in the neighboring town of Grayson. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of man who kept his lawn trimmed with military precision and always paid his bills on time. Those who knew him said he was reserved but polite, the type who would help you jump, start your car but wouldn't stay for coffee afterward. Sarah was his opposite in many ways, warm, talkative, quick to laugh, with a habit of striking up conversations with strangers at the grocery store. She had studied art history for 2 years at community college before dropping out to work full-time. Friends described her as someone who lit up a room, who collected vintage postcards and made elaborate birthday cards by hand, who dreamed of opening a small gallery someday. They married in June of 1996, a small ceremony at the Millbrook Community Church followed by a reception in Daniel's backyard. The wedding photos show Sarah in a simple white dress, her long dark hair adorned with baby's breath, laughing as Daniel lifted her hand to slip on the ring. In every photograph, Sarah is looking at the camera. Daniel is looking at Sarah. Clears throat. They rented a small Cape Cod-style house on Sycamore Street, a quiet road 3 blocks from the town center. Sarah took a waitressing job at Murphy's Diner, working the morning shift from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Daniel left for his factory job at 5:30 each morning, returning home around 6 in the evening. It was a simple life, unremarkable in its rhythms. Sarah would rise at 5:15, shower, dress in her uniform, black pants and white button-down shirt, pull her hair into a ponytail. She would drive her 1989 Honda Civic, powder blue, to the diner, where she would unlock the door at 5:55 and begin brewing coffee for the morning regulars. February 12, 1997, was a Wednesday. The temperature had dropped to 14 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, and a thin crust of ice covered every surface. The sun rose at 6:47 a.m., pale and cold. Daniel Hartley later told investigators that he had left for work at his usual time, 5:30, while Sarah was still in the shower. He said he called out goodbye but didn't wait for her response. He said this was normal. He said he never looked back. Margaret O'Brien, the diner's owner, arrived at Murphy's at 5:55 a.m. as she did every morning. The lights were off. The door was locked. At first she assumed Sarah was running late, perhaps having trouble with the ice on her windshield. Margaret waited in her car with the heater running, watching the empty street. By 6:15, she tried calling the Hartley house. No answer. At 6:30, the early morning regulars began arriving, tapping on the glass door, their breath making clouds in the frozen air. Margaret unlocked the door herself and began the morning preparations alone, glancing at the window every few minutes, expecting to see Sarah's blue Honda pulling into the parking lot. At 7:45 a.m., Margaret called Daniel at the factory. He seemed surprised. She would later tell police. Confused but not alarmed. He said perhaps Sarah had forgotten to set her alarm. He said he would call around, check with her friends. Margaret said she had a strange feeling even then, a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. She said Sarah had never been late before, not once in 18 months of employment. By 9 a.m., Daniel had called the police. At 9:47 a.m., Officer Tom Brennan spotted Sarah's powder blue Honda Civic in the parking lot of the old Riverside Mill, approximately 2 miles from the Hartley residence and 1.5 miles in the opposite direction from Murphy's Diner. The mill had been abandoned for 23 years, its windows boarded up, its parking lot cracked and overgrown with weeds. Local teenagers sometimes used it as a gathering spot, but on a Wednesday morning in February, the lot was empty except for Sarah's car. Officer Brennan approached the vehicle slowly. Later, in his official report, he would note that he felt an immediate sense of wrongness. The driver's side door was open approximately 18 inches. The engine was off, but the keys hung from the ignition. The interior dome light was off, suggesting the door had been open for some time, draining the battery, or that someone had manually switched it off. Sarah's brown leather purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet inside, $43 in cash still present. Her winter jacket, navy blue with a fleece lining, was folded neatly beside the purse. One brown leather glove lay on the driver's side floorboard. The matching glove was never recovered. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no broken glass. The windows were rolled up except for the driver's side, which was cracked approximately 3 inches. The radio was off. The gas tank was 3/4 full. On the dashboard, still clipped to the sun visor, was Sarah's employee name tag from the diner. Officer Brennan called for backup at 9:52 a.m. By 10:30, the parking lot was filled with police vehicles. Chief of Police Walter Hayes, a man who had served the town for 31 years, walked the perimeter of the Honda 4 times, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes moving from the car to the mill to the woods that pressed close on 3 sides. The temperature had risen to 21 degrees. The wind moved through the bare trees with a sound like whispering. "Something's very wrong here," Chief Hayes said to Officer Brennan. Those 3 words appear in Brennan's notes, written in careful block letters and underlined twice. A search was organized immediately. By noon, 37 people had gathered at the site. Police officers from Millbrook and neighboring jurisdictions, volunteer firefighters, members of the community. They formed lines and moved through the woods surrounding the mill, calling Sarah's name, their voices echoing through the bare branches. The ground was frozen hard, covered in a thin layer of snow and dead leaves. Any footprints would have been preserved in the ice. There were none leading away from the car. Daniel Hartley arrived at the scene at 1:15 p.m., having left work immediately upon hearing the news. Those who were present that day would later recall his demeanor with unsettling clarity. He stood beside Sarah's car for several minutes, not touching it, his hands in his coat pockets. His face, they said, was blank, not grief-stricken, not panicked. Simply blank, as if he were looking at something ordinary, a car in a parking lot, nothing more. When Chief Hayes approached to ask him questions, Daniel answered in a flat, measured voice. No, Sarah had not mentioned any problems. No, they hadn't argued. No, she didn't have any enemies. No, she wouldn't have met anyone here. No, she wouldn't have pulled over for a stranger. Did she say anything unusual this morning? Hayes asked. "I left before she did," Daniel said. "I didn't see her before I went to work." "You didn't kiss your wife goodbye," Daniel blinked once slowly. "She was in the shower." Margaret O'Brien from the diner gave a detailed statement to police that afternoon. Sarah had been in good spirits the previous day, Tuesday. She had talked about planning a surprise birthday party for Daniel in April. She had shown Margaret a recipe she'd torn from a magazine for chocolate raspberry cake. She had laughed at a customer's joke about the weather. She had left work at 2:10 p.m., waving goodbye, calling out, "See you tomorrow." Nothing about her behavior suggested distress or fear or secret plans. Sarah's parents, James and Linda Chen, drove from Boston that evening, arriving just after dark. The search continued by flashlight until 11 p.m., then resumed at dawn the following morning. Tracking dogs were brought in from the state police. They circled Sarah's car, sniffing the driver's seat, the door handle, the ground, but they found no scent trail leading away from the vehicle. It was as if Sarah had simply evaporated, leaving behind only her possessions arranged with peculiar care. For those who have ever noticed how a crime scene can feel staged, how objects placed just so can suggest a performance rather than panic, the interior of Sarah's Honda began to look increasingly wrong. The folded jacket, the purse sitting upright, contents undisturbed. The keys left in the ignition, as if someone wanted the car to be found quickly. And that single glove on the floor, the only item out of place, like a planted clue in a mystery novel. The mill parking lot remained an active crime scene for 4 days. By the end of the first week, the search had expanded to a 5-mile radius. Divers searched the Millbrook River. Volunteers walked the abandoned railroad tracks. State police helicopters flew grid patterns over the surrounding forest. The local news covered the story every evening. Young bride vanishes. Search continues for missing Millbrook woman. Community prays for Sarah Hartley's safe return. Sarah's mother sat for an interview on the evening news. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hands trembling as she held a framed photograph of Sarah. "Someone knows something," Linda Chen said, her voice breaking. "Sarah wouldn't just leave. She wouldn't do this to us. Please, if anyone saw anything, heard anything, please come forward." But no one came forward, because no one had seen anything. And that, investigators would later say, was the first real clue. Part 2. The investigation. The Millbrook Police Department had never handled a missing persons case of this magnitude. Chief Hayes called in support from the Massachusetts State Police within hours. And by the end of the first week, a task force of 8 detectives had been assigned to the case. They set up a command center in the basement of Town Hall, covering the walls with maps, timelines, photographs of Sarah, lists of potential witnesses, diagrams of the mill parking lot drawn to scale. Detective Lieutenant Frank Morrison, a 23-year veteran of the state police with experience in homicide investigations, took the lead. He was a compact man with steel-gray hair and the patient, methodical manner of someone who had learned that cases are solved through details, not hunches. He began by mapping every minute of Sarah's last known movements. Sarah had been seen alive, definitively, by 3 people the previous evening. Margaret O'Brien saw her leave the diner at 2:10 p.m. on Tuesday, February 11th. Timothy Walsh, a neighbor, saw her arrive home at approximately 2:25 p.m., waving at him as she pulled into her driveway. And Daniel Hartley claimed to have been home with her from approximately 6:10 p.m., when he arrived home from work, until 5:30 a.m. Wednesday morning, when he left for his shift. But there was a problem with the timeline, a gap that grew more troubling the more detectives examined it. Daniel worked at Grayson Manufacturing, a 42-minute drive from Millbrook in normal traffic conditions. His shift ended at 5:30 p.m. Security logs showed him clocking out at 5:33 p.m. on Tuesday, February 11th. He should have arrived home between 6:10 and 6:20 p.m., accounting for traffic and road conditions. At 6:45 p.m., Sarah called her mother in Boston. They spoke for 11 minutes. Linda Chen told investigators that Sarah sounded normal, happy even. She mentioned that Daniel was running late from work but should be home soon. She was starting dinner, she said. She was making chicken with rosemary and garlic. Did she seem worried that he was late? Detective Morrison asked. No, Linda said. She said he probably stopped for gas or got caught in traffic. Daniel arrived home, he told police, at approximately 6:15 p.m. But if Sarah was on the phone at 6:45 p.m. saying he wasn't home yet, where was he for that missing half hour? When confronted with this discrepancy, Daniel paused for several seconds before answering. I must have stopped somewhere, he said. Maybe I got gas. I don't remember exactly. It was a normal evening. Detectives checked gas station receipts. Daniel's credit card showed no purchases that evening. They checked convenience stores along his route home. No one remembered seeing him. Clears throat. Then there was the matter of Daniel's behavior on the morning of Sarah's disappearance. He claimed he left for work at 5:30 a.m., his usual departure time. But 3 separate witnesses placed him elsewhere. Judith Pearson, who lived 2 doors down from the Hartleys on Sycamore Street, was an early riser. She walked her dog every morning at precisely 5:45 a.m., the same route every day. On Wednesday, February 12th, she saw Daniel Hartley's truck parked in his driveway as she passed at 5:45. She waved. He didn't wave back. He was sitting in the driver's seat, she said, not moving, just sitting there with the engine running. She found it odd enough to mention to her husband over breakfast. Robert Kimball, who worked the night shift at a gas station on Route 7, 3 miles from Millbrook, saw Daniel's truck pull in at approximately 6:20 a.m. He remembered because Daniel usually came in on his way to work, around 5:30 or 5:40, and always bought coffee and a newspaper. On this morning, he was almost an hour later than usual, and he didn't buy anything. He went to the pay phone, made a call that lasted less than a minute, got back in his truck and left. Did he seem agitated? Detective Morrison asked. No, Kimball said. That's what was weird. He seemed real calm. Too calm, if you know what I mean. The third witness was a truck driver named Paul Hendricks, who was hauling lumber along Route 7 that morning. At approximately 6:40 a.m., he saw a dark blue pickup truck matching the description of Daniel's vehicle parked on the shoulder of the road near the entrance to the old Riverside Mill access road. He saw it because he specifically noticed that the truck was there with the engine running, driver inside, not appearing to have any mechanical trouble. He remembered thinking it was odd that someone would just be sitting there at that hour on such a cold morning. Daniel drove a dark blue 1994 Ford F-150. The Riverside Mill parking lot, where Sarah's Honda would be discovered 3 hours later, was accessible via a gravel access road that connected to Route 7. When confronted with these witness statements, Daniel's calm demeanor never wavered. They're mistaken, he said simply. I left at 5:30. I drove straight to work. I clocked in at 6:20. You can check the logs. And they did check. Daniel had clocked in at Grayson Manufacturing at 6:22 a.m. on February 12th. The drive from his house to the factory took approximately 42 minutes. If he left at 5:30, as he claimed, he would have arrived at work at approximately 6:10 to 6:15. He was 7 to 12 minutes later than that timeline would suggest. Unless he made a stop along the way. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves in the halls of the station. The spouse is always the first suspect in cases like these. Statistics showed that when a woman disappeared, the husband was responsible more than 60% of the time. But statistics required evidence, and the evidence, so far, was circumstantial at best. Strange, troubling, but not conclusive. Forensic teams processed Sarah's Honda with painstaking care. They lifted fingerprints from every surface. The steering wheel, the door handles, the gear shift, the radio dials. They found Sarah's prints as expected, and Daniel's prints, which he explained by saying he occasionally drove her car if his truck was in the shop. They found no unknown prints. No signs of forced entry, no fibers that didn't belong. They vacuumed the interior for hair and fiber evidence. They found hairs consistent with Sarah's hair. They found several hairs consistent with Daniel's hair. They found nothing unusual. The car was clean. Unusually clean, the forensic technician noted. The floor mats had been recently vacuumed. There was no dirt, no debris, no salt stains despite the winter weather and icy roads. "When's the last time you cleaned her car?" Detective Morrison asked Daniel. "I don't know. A week ago, maybe. Sarah liked to keep it clean." But Margaret O'Brien from the diner remembered something different. Just the previous week, Sarah had complained about needing to vacuum her car. "It's a mess," Sarah had said, laughing. "I keep meaning to clean it out, but I never get around to it." The mill itself was searched top to bottom. The building had been locked and secured, but locks can be picked, boards can be pried loose. Search teams entered through a broken window on the ground floor and spent 2 days moving through the dark, debris-strewn interior. They found evidence of occasional teenage trespassing, empty beer bottles, cigarette butts, graffiti on the walls. They found no evidence of recent disturbance, no blood, no clothing, no sign that anyone had been inside recently. The woods surrounding the mill were searched again and again. Grid patterns, spiral patterns, cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, nothing. It was as if Sarah had been lifted from her car and carried away by something that left no trace. Daniel submitted to multiple interviews. He answered every question. He never asked for a lawyer. His affect remained bizarrely flat. Detectives noted that he never cried. He never raised his voice. He never seemed frustrated by their repeated questions. He simply answered again and again in the same measured tone, the same words. "I don't know where she is. I want to find her. I just want her to come home." But his body language told a different story. He sat completely still during interviews, hands folded on the table, making consistent eye contact. Most people being questioned by police show signs of anxiety: fidgeting, shifting position, breaking eye contact, physical tells that indicate stress. Daniel showed none of these. It was, Detective Morrison later wrote in his notes, like interviewing a mannequin. The community response was overwhelming at first. Volunteer search teams showed up every day for the first 2 weeks. Missing person flyers were posted in every store window, on every telephone pole, at every gas station within 50 miles. Local churches held prayer vigils. A tip line was established. It rang constantly, but the tips led nowhere. Someone thought they saw Sarah at a rest stop in Connecticut. It wasn't her. Someone claimed to have seen a woman matching her description, getting into a car with an unknown man. The timeline didn't match. Someone called to say their psychic had a vision of Sarah near water. Divers searched every body of water within 10 miles. Nothing. By the end of March, 6 weeks after Sarah's disappearance, the daily search operations had ceased. The tip line had gone quiet. The news cameras had moved on to other stories. The task force scaled back to 3 detectives. Chief Hayes gave a statement to the press, carefully worded. "We remain committed to finding Sarah Hartley and bringing closure to her family. This is an active investigation, and we continue to follow all leads." But there were no leads. Only a growing, gnawing suspicion that everyone felt but no one could prove. Daniel Hartley failed 2 polygraph examinations. He agreed to take them voluntarily, confident, he said, that they would clear his name. The first test, administered 3 weeks after Sarah's disappearance, showed deception in response to 3 key questions. Do you know where Sarah is? Did you harm Sarah? Are you responsible for Sarah's disappearance? The examiner noted that Daniel's physiological responses indicated significant stress responses inconsistent with truthful answers. Daniel's response when informed of the results was eerily calm. "Those tests aren't accurate," he said. "Everyone knows they're not reliable. I'm telling the truth." He took a second polygraph 4 weeks later, administered by a different examiner using different equipment. The results were the same. Deception indicated on all critical questions. "The machine is wrong," Daniel said. Prosecutors met with the task force repeatedly throughout the spring of 1997. The problem was simple and insurmountable. No body meant no proof of death. No proof of death meant no murder charge. And while the circumstantial evidence pointed toward Daniel, circumstantial evidence alone was not enough to charge him, let alone convict him. The discrepancies in his timeline, the witness sightings, the failed polygraphs, his strange behavior, all of it combined to paint a troubling picture. But it wasn't proof. "We know he did something," Detective Morrison told his team in a meeting in late May. "We just can't prove what." Sarah's parents, James and Linda Chen, met with prosecutors and begged them to charge Daniel with something, anything. "He killed our daughter," Linda said, tears streaming down her face. "We know he did. Everyone knows he did. You have to do something." But there was nothing to be done. Not yet. By summer, the case file was moved to the cold case archives. Sarah Hartley was officially listed as a missing person, presumed deceased. Daniel remained a person of interest but was never charged. He continued to live in the house on Sycamore Street, continued to work at Grayson Manufacturing, continued to maintain his innocence to anyone who asked. Those who knew him said he never spoke about Sarah after the first year. He took down her photographs. He donated her clothes to Goodwill. He removed her name from the mailbox. It was, neighbors whispered, as if she had never existed at all. The swing in the backyard hung still in the summer heat. The garden Sarah had started planting the previous fall went to weeds. And somewhere, in a place no one had yet found, Sarah Hartley waited in the silence. Part 3. The silence. By the fall of 1997, 8 months after Sarah vanished, Daniel Hartley began dating again. Her name was Christine Morrow, 26 years old, a dental hygienist who worked in Grayson. They met, Daniel told People, through a mutual friend. They were seen together at the annual Millbrook Harvest Festival in October, walking side by side through the rows of pumpkins and apple cider stands, not touching but clearly together. The sight of them caused a ripple of whispered outrage through the community. "His wife's been missing less than a year, and he's already moved on," Judith Pearson told her husband. "What kind of man does that?" But Christine seemed devoted. She moved into the house on Sycamore Street in December, 3 weeks before what would have been Sarah and Daniel's second wedding anniversary. She hung new curtains in the kitchen. She planted tulip bulbs in the garden where Sarah's herbs had once grown. She told anyone who asked that she believed Daniel was innocent, that he had been through a terrible ordeal, that he deserved to move forward with his life. In March of 1998, 13 months after Sarah's disappearance, Daniel and Christine were married in a civil ceremony at the courthouse. No celebration, no reception, just the two of them and 2 witnesses from Christine's family. Sarah's parents were not informed until weeks later, when a mutual acquaintance mentioned it in passing. Linda Chen told Detective Morrison that she vomited when she heard the news. "He killed my daughter and now he's playing house with someone new," she said. "How is this allowed to happen?" Morrison had no answer. The case remained open but cold. No new evidence had emerged. Sarah's body had not been found. And without a body, without proof of death, there could be no murder charge. The law, for all its mechanisms and procedures, had no remedy for the terrible knowing without proving. Time passed with the strange elasticity of tragedy. For some, it moved quickly, days blurring into months. For others, it crawled, each hour weighted with unresolved grief. James and Linda Chen moved from Boston to a smaller town in Vermont, unable to bear the proximity to Millbrook, to the place where their daughter had simply vanished. Linda developed insomnia that would plague her for the rest of her life. James threw himself into work, 70-hour weeks, anything to avoid the silence of an empty house. They called Detective Morrison every few months, always the same questions. "Is there any news? Are you still investigating? What about Daniel?" Morrison's answers were always the same. "We haven't forgotten Sarah. We're still working the case. We need a break, a new lead, something." Without that, his hands were tied. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the slow creeping suspicion that something is deeply wrong beneath a surface of normalcy. Christine Maura Hartley's life between 1998 and 2003 would be grimly recognizable. At first, she later told police, everything seemed normal. Daniel was quiet, yes, but she had always known that about him. He was methodical, organized to the point of compulsion, but she appreciated order. He didn't talk much about Sarah, but Christine told herself this was healthy, a sign that he had processed his grief and moved on. The first crack in the facade appeared in late 1998, 10 months after their marriage. Christine was cleaning the basement, organizing boxes that had been stacked haphazardly in the corner. In one box, beneath old tax documents and warranty papers for appliances they no longer owned, she found a manila envelope. Inside were photographs of Sarah, wedding photos. Photos of Sarah at the diner, caught mid-laugh by someone with a camera. Photos of Sarah sleeping, her face peaceful against a white pillowcase, clearly taken without her knowledge. Christine brought the envelope upstairs. "I found these," she said to Daniel, who was watching television. "Do you want to keep them somewhere safe? Maybe with her parents?" Daniel's reaction was immediate and cold. He stood up, crossed the room in 3 strides, and took the envelope from her hands. "Don't go through my things," he said. His voice was level, but something flickered behind his eyes, something Christine couldn't quite name, but that made her step backward involuntarily. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," he said again and walked upstairs. She heard the bedroom door close. Lock. He didn't speak to her for 3 days. Small incidents accumulated like sediment. Daniel's insistence on knowing where Christine was at all times. His habit of checking the mileage on her car when she returned from errands. The way he would ask casually who she had talked to at the grocery store, what they had discussed, how long the conversation lasted. At first, Christine interpreted this as concern, perhaps residual trauma from losing Sarah. But over time, it began to feel like surveillance. In 2000, Christine became pregnant. She was overjoyed, expecting Daniel to share her excitement. Instead, he seemed withdrawn, anxious in a way she had never seen. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked her. "Not we, you." "I thought you wanted children," Christine said. "Things change," Daniel replied. Their daughter Emma was born in December of 2000. She was healthy, beautiful, with Christine's dark eyes and Daniel's serious expression. Daniel was, to all external observation, a dutiful father. He changed diapers. He took night feedings. He never raised his voice. But there was something absent in his interactions with the baby, Christine thought. Some essential warmth that should have been there but wasn't. He held Emma like she was an object that needed to be transported from one place to another, not a child to be cherished. As Emma grew from infant to toddler, she developed a curious habit. She didn't like her father to touch her. When Daniel reached for her, she would pull away, turning toward Christine instead. When he entered a room, she would grow quiet, watchful, her small body tensing. Christine told herself this was a phase, a normal part of development. But a mother's instinct is a powerful thing, and Christine's instinct told her something was wrong. In the spring of 2003, when Emma was 2.5 years old, Christine found something that made her blood run cold. She was doing laundry, emptying pockets before putting Daniel's work pants in the washing machine, when she found a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a hardware store in Grayson, dated February 11, 1997, the day before Sarah disappeared. The items purchased: 50 feet of rope, a folding shovel, heavy-duty garbage bags, duct tape, and work gloves. Christine stood in the laundry room, the receipt trembling in her hands for a full 5 minutes. Her mind raced through possibilities, explanations. Maybe it was for a work project. Maybe it was for yard work. Maybe it was completely innocent. But the date, February 11th, the day before Sarah vanished. She confronted Daniel that evening after Emma was in bed. "I found something," she said, placing the receipt on the kitchen table between them. "Do you want to explain this?" Daniel looked at the receipt for a long moment. Then he looked at Christine. His face was utterly blank. "I bought supplies for the yard. We were going to build a shed that spring. I never got around to it after Sarah disappeared." "Rope," Christine said. "Garbage bags, cleaning up the yard, normal things. Why are you looking at me like that?" "Because this was the day before Sarah disappeared, Daniel." "I know what day it was," he said, his voice dropping to something quieter, more dangerous. "I know exactly what day it was. Are you accusing me of something, Christine?" And in that moment, Christine realized with absolute clarity that she was afraid, not of an argument, not of conflict. She was afraid of her husband, afraid of what he might be capable of, afraid of what he might have already done. "No," she said quietly, "I'm not accusing you of anything." But she was lying, and he knew it. The marriage deteriorated rapidly after that night. Daniel's surveillance of Christine intensified. He began calling her during the day, multiple times, under the guise of checking in. He asked her to account for every penny she spent. He questioned her about conversations she'd had with neighbors, with other mothers at the playground, with the checkout clerk at the supermarket. The house on Sycamore Street, which had never quite felt like home to Christine, began to feel like a prison. Emma's behavior grew more troubling. She had nightmares, waking screaming several nights a week. She drew pictures with crayons. Dark scribbles, figures with no faces, houses with all the windows colored black. When Christine asked her preschool teacher if Emma seemed happy at school, the teacher hesitated before answering. "She's very quiet," the teacher said. "Withdrawn. She doesn't interact much with the other children. Has something happened at home?" Nothing happened, Christine wanted to say, but that wasn't true. Something had happened years ago, and its shadow still lay over all of them. In June of 2004, 7 years after Sarah's disappearance, Christine made her decision. She waited until Daniel left for work, then loaded Emma and 2 suitcases into her car and drove to her sister's house in New Hampshire. She filed for divorce the following week. She also did something else, something she had been gathering courage to do for months. She called Detective Morrison. "I think my husband killed his first wife," she said when Morrison answered the phone. "And I think I know where she might be." Part 4. The revelation. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in late June 2004, 7 years and 4 months after Sarah Hartley had disappeared. Detective Morrison, now 53 years old and carrying the weight of dozens of unsolved cases, almost didn't answer when he saw the unfamiliar number. But instinct made him pick up. "This is Christine Hartley," the voice on the other end said. She was crying. "I need to tell you something about my husband, about Daniel, about what he did." Morrison sat up straighter in his chair, grabbed a pen. "Mrs. Hartley, I'm going to record this conversation. Is that all right with you?" "Yes," Christine said. "Record it, write it down. I should have called years ago. I was just so scared." Over the next 45 minutes, Christine told Morrison everything. The photographs hidden in the basement. The receipt from February 11th. The way Daniel monitored her every movement. Emma's fear of her father. But more than that, she told him about a conversation she had overheard 3 weeks earlier. A conversation that had finally pushed her to leave and to call the police. Daniel had been in the garage, talking on his cell phone. Christine had been in the kitchen, the window cracked open, and she could hear his voice clearly though she couldn't see him. He was speaking to someone, she never learned who, and his tone was defensive, angry in a way she rarely heard from him. "I don't care if you think it was a mistake," Daniel had said. "What's done is done. She's not coming back. She's been in the ground for 7 years and nobody's found her yet. Nobody's going to." Christine's hands had frozen on the dish she was washing. She had stood completely still, barely breathing, listening. "I did what I had to do," Daniel continued. "She was going to leave. She told me she wanted a divorce. She said she was in love with someone else. What was I supposed to do? Just let her destroy everything?" There was a pause. Then, "The old mill property, behind the building. I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to tell you exactly where. But if you're so concerned, go dig around and see what you find." He laughed then, a sound Christine had never heard from him before, cold and bitter.